is that what the state has to do to justify itself is to make everybody better off than they would be in the so-called state of nature without the government. And what I argue in one of my books is that this is empirically false. If you look at the worst off people in our society today, the most oppressed people, they, as a philosopher, economist named Henry George said over 100 years ago, he said, if you offered them a chance to exchange with someone someone who lived in the Central African rainforest, they couldn't afford to say no. They'd actually be better off. And it's still, if you look at somebody in a shanty town in Sao Paulo who's making our clothing versus somebody in the part of the Amazon that they haven't burned down yet, the people in the Amazon very often have better lives. And I've got a long empirical argument for that, if you doubt what I'm saying. Now, that's just a simple argument that we haven't done it. But of course my solution is, well, we just need to start doing it. It's not that hard. It's not that people in the Amazon do very well. It's just that we treat the oppressed so poorly. Now, basing on the work of Carol Paper, the feminist philosopher, who wrote a book called The Sexual Contract. It was then followed up by Charles Mills, based on her work that wrote the racial contract, and the two together talk about settler contracts, where colonial powers come in, and they have a social contract that it's really only for the men. The women don't count. It's only for the white people, the other races don't count. Or it's only for the settler communities, not for the indigenous communities. Is that our social contracts have tended to be not real social contracts, but there's insiders and there's outsiders. Now, the argument that I'm trying to craft is that we always fail to make a true social contract. Is that we always have some outgroup that we never quite treat well enough to give them rational, reasonable reasons to sign up and say, yes, I'm part of the social contract, this society works for me. Well, if they're killing your people, if the police are killing people from your group at several times the rate that they're killing people from the in-group, maybe you shouldn't be consenting to stay. Maybe there is no social contract that includes you. Now, the argument that I get is, of course, we should try to make a social contract that includes everybody, that has no outgroup, but we will fail. Because everyone suffers from self-serving bias. So what we have to do is have not only a basic income high enough to make sure that you have a voluntary participation economy where you don't have to work if you don't choose to. But also, we have to have the highest sustainable basic income because we want to err on giving asking as little as possible and giving as much as possible to the least advantaged in our society. That is the closest we can come to creating a true inclusive social contract, and still we will fail. That's where that argument comes.
I saw a hand here, and then there's somebody down here.
All right, thanks, Karl. I came a little late. My question is, you've been doing this, you say, 39 years? I wasn't even born. How come the big media, like CNN, they never talk about basic income? If I didn't know you, or Elizabeth, I would never hear about universal basic income. And what explains the war on poverty or the war on poor people in this country? For someone who wasn't born here, for us, this country is so rich, there shouldn't be no poor in this country. It's ridiculous how people don't have health care in the wealthiest nation in the history of humanity. And instead of spending that money on basic things, they spend it on wars or something else. But I want to be short. My real concern is the stigmatization of poor people and the downsizing of the middle class. This one medical bill before we all get bankrupt, which is really crazy if you think about it. So how come we never heard about universal basic income on the news, on the big media news, and also what explains how rich people were able to regulate the narrative, to tell us that if you work 40 hours, you don't have free health care, you're probably lazy. That's my question. I don't want to be too long.
Well, there's no one answer. There's no one answer to that. There's so many different reasons. It's older than America. I remember a sociologist at the first Basic Income Conference in the United States back in 2002 saying, we've been worrying about giving alms to the sturdy beggar since the Elizabethan era, and we've got to get our heads out of this idea. Part of it is, the general thing, I think, is self-serving bias. Is that the people who are well off control the narrative, and they do not understand the extent to which they are furthering, what they're doing is self-serving. They convince themselves that it is justice when it's their own extremely biased perspective of justice from their own standpoint. And then this follows from another idea that the belief in a just world that affects not only the self-serving bias of the well-to-do, but also it affects the rest of us are likely to have bias in the favor of the well-to-do. It's the belief in a just world is that it's really painful to believe. It's really painful to believe that you can do everything right and still everything will go wrong for you. It is much, even if you're a low-down person who lives in poverty and but it is in many ways more pleasant to believe that I have largely dug this own hole. Maybe I've had a phone about luckily breaks, but it's not that things are fundamentally stacked against them. So this narrative is controlled at the top actually affects a lot of other people. Now, and then another thing is classism and racism. And I always feel uncomfortable when a black man asks me a question about racism, or a woman asks me about sexism. I teach in the Middle East, so I'm always telling a group of Muslims about Western prejudice against Muslims, which is tough as well. Now, but in this country, race is inseparable from class in this country. People say, is it race or is it class? Which to me is a stupid question, because blacks were brought here to be a class. They were brought here to be the extra low class. And even today, there's, I think some of the two main kinds of prejudice you see is like, oh, you're not fitting into that extra low class, so we don't like you for doing that. Or, oh, we just assume you're in this extra low class, so we're going to assume you do all these bad things that we think people in the extra low class do. So still, race is class. And so the idea is that it allows people at the top to believe that there's these bad values at the bottom. And the real problem, people don't know how to spend, they don't know how to save, they don't know how to work, they don't want to work, and they can tell themselves this. That becomes part of this overall narrative. And there is, I think, less of a sense of solidarity in this country as there are in other countries. But even in places like Sweden, that, in saying Sweden, everybody thinks Sweden, they're all in it together and they're everybody. And a lot of Swedish people have told me that might have been true 40 years ago, but that's not true anymore. They're not as bad off as we are, but they've gutted their welfare system and they've started to think of the lower class Swedes as bad as everybody else. And I don't think that our ethnic diversity means that we necessarily have to treat each other poorly. I think if you look at Finland and Norway, the surviving good welfare systems, you find a lot of diverse. We don't think of them being diverse because they don't think it's such a big deal. They've got, in Finland, they've got the Lapps, they've got women, they've got town people, they've got country people, they got rich people, they got poor people, they've got they got immigrants, they got Russians, they got a lot, they got Swedish minorities. They got a lot of economic and ethnic diversity, but they don't make a big deal out of it. I think we can do that too.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so my question, I see that people in America maybe can think of UBI well because they see that we're in this time where the economy is doing relatively well, but the inequality is growing. How different do you think UBI would look in a time of economic recession or depression?
Well, economically, UBI is really good for that because a UBI system is an automatic stabilizer. UBI itself is not an automatic stabilizer because everybody gets it. However, you have to look at it in combination with the taxes that finance it. So when we go into recession, people are making less income, so they're paying less taxes, but they're getting the same basic income. So the amount they pay that goes down, the amount they receive stays the same, and that means that there's net bigger redistribution whenever there's a recession. And when you have that, that's called, economists call that an automatic stabilizer. It makes the recessions not as bad as the other ones were. It also helps to prop up wages, because when you have a recession, one of the things that happen is wages stop growing and even decline because people are out there competing even harder for the jobs. People are less likely to accept a pay cut in a recession. So in that sense, it has a lot of really good effects. And really, the most important reason to not want to be in a recession is poverty. And basic income, if it's high enough, will eliminate poverty, so we shouldn't care that much. When we have a recession, a big recession would be if our output goes down by 5%. Well,